Well, hello 420 MSP fans. Harry Brailsford at Hacker House in Seattle, back at you. I'm in an undisclosed hidden location doing the voodoo that I do. And today is really cool that we're with a gentleman, Marc Haskelson, that he'll self-introduce himself in a moment, but I want to paint the picture. I met Marc. I've certainly heard of his company, the Compliancy Group, but I met him live at the ChannelPro SMB event in Chicago about a month ago. That would have been, I believe, late April, early May. It was May 2nd, in fact. And what was very interesting about that is that was our big reveal for the 420 MSP community. But during those days, right in there, 2 state senators in the state of Illinois had introduced a bill, 300-page bill, to legalize cannabis in that particular state. It went to the governor. I believe it's been signed. He had to kind of work through some coalition issues, as politics tends to do, but he was for it. And it was interesting, Marc, that the conversations I had surrounding that were taxation revenue was the primary driver. Not that the state of Illinois is a left coast, west coast. You know, they don't roll quite like we do in Seattle. God bless them. But that was a very interesting conversation. With that lead in, please self-introduce yourself, and then I want to talk about what you do in the cannabis vertical.
All right, so I'm the president of a company called Compliancy Group. Our primary focus is around the world of HIPAA, which has to do with healthcare, and how that ends up intersecting with what is the cannabis industry is, if you think of medical use marijuana, it is basically a pharmacy dealing with a prescription. So they fall fully under HIPAA law. So we've, although our core business is helping the more traditional mainstream environment, we have lots of states that are using us at the state level, as well as individual organizations that are using us to help them satisfy that part of the law so that they basically can dispense legally. Yeah.
So I'll tell you, let me just kind of throw it out there. Give me a couple tales from the trenches, maybe some specifics, what you're seeing with the sector, maybe some people you're advising. Feel free to autonomize the data so we don't reveal your clients.
No. And you know, just even on that note, you know, 5 years ago when we started doing this, we were very discreet about even mentioning that we were dealing with the medical marijuana arena, because we were afraid our mainstream clients, lots of, you know, large hospitals and other far more mainstream organizations would be concerned or turn off by it. But what has been interesting, just in the last, let's say, 3 years, maybe, you know, what we've seen is now this is mainstream. You know, when you go to these events or you go, you know, I originally, when we first got involved, we were expecting to see a bunch of kind of stoner skateboard kids. Now what you see is much more, you know, people with gray hair, and, you know, these are the big investment houses. We've seen a lot of the law firms are taking strong positions on let's say, big institutional investments that view cannabis as a very viable, you know, the future of a very profitable opportunities.
Yeah, no, it is. And, you know, let's talk about the messaging, because when I wrote the book that I showed you back in Chicago, on page 1 of chapter 1, we just get the Cheech and Chong elephant right out of the room, right? We're not here to party. And my book is a serious business book that happened to pick, you know, arguably one of the fastest growing sectors in North America. And in the month or so since I saw you, I continue to lead. I would have talked with you about this medical marijuana, CBD. I continue to lead with that. And now my new talking point, and note to self, let's type that out as one of my blogs, but palliative care. So even within the medical profession, had a really good conversation with a doctor here in Seattle at Virginia Mason who does pain management and palliative care. And he's allowed to talk about marijuana. Okay, so that right there is an issue that he can even speak towards it and recommend it. In the past, I have to believe the medical profession would have been really reluctant to go on the record with that. And interestingly, the well-known factors of appetite, generating appetite and suppressing nausea, that's a pretty well-known story. But he said, more times than not, what I'm really doing is recommending cannabis, and of course in edible form. You will not find a doctor that would recommend you put anything in your lungs. But he said it's for anxiety control. He said that's what he's seeing with the cancer patients. Does that make sense?
Well, the other one we've seen a lot of also, you see epilepsy, children's form of epilepsy. We're seeing that and by the way, we're obviously not involved with the medical side, but because we're interacting with so many of the dispensaries that are dealing with this, we pay close attention to it. But there's a myriad of far more valuable, whether it's pain relief, you mentioned nausea, which is very well known, appetite is very well known, but there's all sorts of other areas that you're seeing, great data proving that this is a healthy, cost-effective, non-invasive, with very few side effects that really make it a great drug. If you want to call it a drug, I guess that's what it's falling under.
Yeah, and we could go on and on about the political attitudes and so on. In fact, let me just show you. It's up on our site, folks, under our white papers. This white paper just dropped. Hang on, Mark. When you talk with me, I can take the conversation a lot of different directions on the fly. But there's a white paper, folks, over at 420 MSP. Crossing the Mississippi U.S. Cannabis Market 2019 report. And Mark, it certainly touches on some of the legal issues and who's legal and who's not, but interestingly, it talks about attitudes, and there would be a little bit of a compliance conversation here. So the West Coast arguably led the way in legalization, and then the East Coast is starting to follow, and they talk about geographic and cultural differences, but more importantly, what the East Coast is doing, according to this new report from Brightfield Group, is they are going slower than the West Coast. They are taking their time, and they are learning from the experiences of the West Coast, because on the West Coast, what we had was this gold rush, in technology we call the Gartner hype curve, right? So you have the hype curve and then the trough of disillusionment. Typical .com type behavior. And what they're saying is that, quite frankly, there was what word am I looking for from your business days? Oversubscribed, overcapitalized. You know what I mean? Too many people got in too quick on the hype, and there's been a shakeout on the West Coast. And it also made the job of the state of Washington and Oregon, which I know best, followed by Colorado. It made their job hard in terms of licensing and enforcement and tracking and so on. So the East Coast is going slower. I don't know if you want to catch what I'm throwing.
Well, so it's interesting to bring it up, because when we first started talking to California, we heard numbers that as high as 40% of the dispensaries were not legal. That was that they were not following, they were not taxing, they were not following any of the rules. We've also seen on our side, because part of what we do is also gets involved with credit card processing. We do a lot in PCI. And my background in the world of continuity payments, we've had dialogues with the Card Interchange Association that would like very much, it's a big chunk of revenue, right? Everybody wants to get a part of that, of that economic value. That the belief that we're hearing is let's say the gotchas that were identified on the West Coast in the initial launching of these things, whether it was legal, seed to sale tracking of compliance, truly making sure that everything was tracked and monitored correctly.
Yep.
You saw, let's say, Colorado, where you have both recreational dispensary and medicinal dispensary are two separate beasts. A lot of this had to do with the ability for these organizations to prove that they were satisfying, let's say, in this case, HIPAA is a known law in healthcare, but satisfying other regulatory acts, right? That, this was not just going to become dealers dealing out of a building versus doing it illegally, out of their cars. I do find it interesting, though, that and especially, and I think one of the things that's really helped, I think, moving it along is the fact that and this was what I was saying earlier, the big investment houses and the big legal groups are embracing this and saying, if we get involved and we're part of the driving of where this is going to make a lot of money for everybody. And then,
Yeah.
The speculation of, and you and I were talking about it briefly when we were together, why is this even listed as a class 1 drug? It doesn't make sense, right? It should be treated like alcohol.
One quick story that I think relates to compliance, and then one final question for you. But the story is, I went to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, hell of a conference, and I announced my book there. And they had word of the day, oversubscribed cannabis track, right? Standing room only in the lecture halls. And I talked to a mom who's opposed to cannabis. That I got it. And I talked to her about, the barcoding and the traceability and the packaging and safety, and we can do a recall. God forbid there's molds and mildews. And I said, I'm not sure I convinced her, but Mark, here's my point. And anybody listening, if you're opposed to it, I still want you to get involved. I still want you to raise your hand and go to public hearings and say, I am opposed. Educate yourself, maybe get on one of the variety of government commissions that are out there. But Mark, that's kind of how I roll, is we're all better for it. I don't think anybody wants to see dangerous stuff, and do we all want packaging that's identifiable for edibles? Absolutely. So don't know if you have a couple thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. And I think what the medium that it is being distributed is changing very rapidly, right? The days of when people made something in their college dorms is not what we're talking about today. We are talking about legitimate production facilities, state of the art, that are putting out high quality. And in some ways, you could argue, because the quality has changed so much, that it is a more potent version than what existed in the past. But I do think that there is just so much opportunity for, and in this case, I say regulation not as in like HIPAA compliance, but as in helping come up with standards so that all folks can, users can use this more confidently, right? And that the producers can be putting out, true, predictable, high quality product. Because I tell you, there's just so many better forms now, whether it's CBD or full cannabis. I think this is going to be, this is not a flash in the pan. I think this is just going to continue to grow in the United States and hopefully worldwide, because it has lots of great, if you look at the opioid crisis, which is usually when you see some negative implication, you turn around, and let's say, so we're pro, obviously, but just think about it. Why have all of these issues with opioids that have all of these terrible side effects? Okay, when you can be dealing with a natural medication that has maybe perhaps not as much efficacy of, let's say, true pain relief of the advanced late nature of some of the opioids, but most of these people are dealing with discomfort issues that can be addressed in a much healthier way. And
absolutely. Final question is, our audience is managed services providers in the technology realm. So how could an MSP interact with you by your URLs down beneath us? So how can an MSP work with you, Mark?
Well, just about any MSP is welcome to work with us. In regards to the, let's say, specific the cannabis arena, we have experience. We have relationships with several of the states that have legalized. So that the most common thing we're seeing of our involvement is a validation issue. So if the MSPs that are looking for tools to help them have a third party be part of the validation process, we're a great role for that. In general, just as from an MSP perspective, what the experience that we've seen in our time getting involved with the MSPs is HIPAA HIPAA will validate existing security efforts and absolutely justifies the more advanced security that the MSPs want to put in place that are more cost effective and more effective, right, for the actual in the actual protection from a security perspective. So, you know, for if you're looking for that, we're a great way to help you in the most, let's say, down to earth. We often are involved with helping people double their monthly recurring revenues and triple their profits with their clients by combining or addressing the total problem for their client versus just the security issue, right? Because often your client, you know, we think, you know, in the technology space, we're thinking technology and specifically security as an MSP, but your client has a bigger problem. And by getting involved with, in this case, our process and our methodology or our approach, it allows you to address, hey, because if nothing else, healthcare is still, it's 26% of the US market is involved in healthcare, of which, especially for the average MSP that is striving, or let's say their marketplace is the small and mid-sized organization, that's a half, that it is 5 million organizations that fall in that category, that fall under HIPAA law. So it's a great, you know, many of our partners use this as a lead-in to open the door for their event, for their security services. So please.
And we'll end on that note. So thank you for your time. And again, we're going to check in with you next quarter and double click down into some additional topics in this vertical. Thank you, Marc. And as always, Jenny in the radio control room, thank you. Folks, have a great day. And thank you for supporting 420msp.com.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.